Well, yes, with Masonic sorcery theatre, there's always these layers. There's the official version, the events as they've been manipulated to create this theatre that we are then given by the mass media, and most of us take as exactly what happened. And then underneath that, if we start to dig a little deeper, we find what appears to be maybe the real story, but then it's often just another cover story.
I mean, is there a design behind this? You're probably familiar with some of the history of the Manson family, even before Charlie got out or before the family formed. There was connections there with, we were talking about Susan Atkins before. She was a go-go dancer in the North Beach of San Francisco and ended up working for Anton LaVey. He had a Witch's Sabbath review, and she played the role of a vampire. There was, so there's a curious connection long, before the Manson family formed. You have Bobby Beausoleil, who is locked up now for what is probably was the first in the Manson family murders, the Gary Hinman murder. Prior to hooking up with the Manson family, Beausoleil was associate of Kenneth Anger, the occult filmmaker, prodigy of Aleister Crowley. In fact, appeared as in the role of Lucifer in his film Invocation for My Demon Brother, and later actually scored the film Lucifer Rising. Also in that film Invocation of My Demon Brother was Anton LaVey, who was connected with Kenneth Anger. So you had, all these connections forming prior to the whole Manson family.
Well, of course, LaVey playing Satan in Rosemary's Baby.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure if that is an established fact or not. I've been looking into this recently too, and I had noted that, I had heard that elsewhere, and I had written about that in my book. Then I've heard other things that was perhaps an urban legend. Then I've recently heard from other sources that it's actually Anton LaVey's eyes that you see in Rosemary's Baby as the eyes of the devil. So I'm not quite sure whether it's fact or fiction. That myth is out there.
It's part of the meme.
Pardon me? Yeah.
It's part of the meme. It becomes part of the narrative, even if it's not true.
Oh, another rumor or urban legend, who knows, that during the course of filming Rosemary's Baby, LaVey and Polanski had a falling out, and LaVey put a curse on Polanski, which led to the Manson family murders. Of course, LaVey was such a self-promoter that, he wouldn't put it past him throwing something out there just to help publicize himself.
Sure. So do you think that, I know Manson's always been evasive about his part in these killings, but has he ever actually out and out denied it?
Yeah, he has. What you hear, and if you listen to some of his interviews, is that you have to read between the lines, too, of what he says, but that he was set up, he was used as a scapegoat. For the Manson family murders, and that he had less control of the killers than Bugalosi and a lot of the others that said who've created this whole helter-skelter thing. He said that's something the DEA made up, and that's something that the media jumped on, but that isn't how it happened. There is no physical evidence connecting Manson to the murders. He did slice Gary Hinman's ear, but then he left before the murder happened, and I don't think he expected Hinman to be murdered. The argument is that he directed all the thought traffic behind the murders, but he didn't physically participate in any, even though he supposedly got everybody to the La Bianca house on the second night of the murders, delivered in there, then kind of basically told him, what to do. Do something witchy, like he told him on the previous night, the Tate murders. This is an ongoing thing there. I've been actually communicating with some people recently that are still looking into this angle that Manson was used as a scapegoat, and it was some bigger operation behind all of this. There's a ton of theories out there that Manson family were being used as a hit team for the mafia, and Charlie definitely had those connections going back to prison. He knew some big mafiosos, like Frankie Carbo was one guy who was a member of a mafia family, and he knew Creepy Karpus, Alvin Creepy Karpus, and all these other characters. So yeah, it's definitely a possibility. A lot of Lino LaBianca, and he had, sounds like, some pretty sizable gambling debts to the mob.
Right. Yes, I've definitely heard those theories, but is it possible even that Manson didn't know about the murders until afterwards? Do you think?
I suppose it is possible, but, from the testimony of the, those convicted for the murders, it, definitely sound like he was directing their actions. At least that's the picture they were painting. Right. But who knows? Maybe that was all coerced.
Yeah, I mean, if they were programmed through mind control to commit the acts, they could have also been programmed.
It's funny, I was having this conversation with Visigoth today, who you were just on his show recently, and he's actually putting together an interview, and I won't give out too much, but the individual in question, she's just kind of come across this, and she's kind of came to the conclusion that Manson didn't know anything about this, and she's putting the pieces together, and I think we're going to pull together some interview here in the next month or two, and Viz was going to get my take on it, and Andy Colvin, the Mothman photographer, he's done quite a bit of Manson research, and this yet-to-be unnamed lady who's looking into this theory that, Manson didn't know about the murders and was basically set up as a scapegoat. He's never admitted to doing the murders, and he basically says, it was out of his hands. Can a father direct all the actions of his children? And that he just was brought down with the whole house of cards and used as the ceremonial scapegoat.
The pharmacos.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it does make sense. I mean, because not to already have an opinion about it, but just trying to be open-minded, Manson's always been a pretty lucid guy, despite the way the media tries to present him.
He has been, but he'll talk in riddles.
Yeah, and he's definitely a trickster.
And also, there's some interviews where one of the most famous is the Tom Snyder interview, and it was obvious that he was drugged while that interview was going on, not self-prescribed drug, but that they had shot him up. Yeah, he definitely looked like he was drugged during that Tom Snyder interview.
Well, because he wouldn't really have anything to lose, would he, by just acknowledging having a hand in it? He's never going to get out of jail.
No, he's not. That's a given, yeah.
And everybody thinks he's the devil anyway, so it really wouldn't...
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It wouldn't really change anyone's opinion of him, except a very small few, if he actually just came out and said, yeah, I told him to do it. It really wouldn't cause any big ripples, would it? I don't think.
Yeah.
So it's curious, significant in itself, I think, that he continues to deny it after so long. It's something that I've been working on ever since I really got into this field, to be honest, but getting closer and closer to it, looking for the unified field theory of paranoia, you might say.
Yeah.
And, what's behind all these different agendas, and I don't mean in sort of a nuts and bolts way, but in a more subtle way. What's the common theme behind all the different forms of event manipulation, mind control, and media and sorcery, theatre, and all the rest of it? And what I'm coming up with is this idea of what they call crazy making, which is if you can get people to believe something that isn't true, then they have to constantly sustain this false reality to maintain that belief. So they have to keep blocking out anything that goes against this idea they have of reality. And so, in other words, the more things that we can be manipulated to believe that aren't true, the crazier we become, and the easier to manipulate we become, because we're essentially getting more and more disconnected from our intuitive sense of knowing, from our potential to just know things instinctively, the gnosis. And so, as long as we're connected to that, we just have this gut sense of what's true and what's false, then it's very hard to trick us and deceive us. And so I think all of this Masonic sorcery theory and all of this event manipulation, behind it all is this common aim, which is to get us to believe things which are not true. And so the further they are from the truth, the better also, because that creates even greater tension between our conscious minds, what we're telling ourselves is true over and over again, and what our unconscious is telling us, that no, this is not really what's happening. So we have to cut off more and more from what our unconscious is telling us just to sustain this illusion, this false reality that we're being fed. And so it's kind of like the thing that they want to make us think that black is white and white is black. And so with something like Manson, if he really wasn't a bad guy, let's say, okay, he was white, he had this, but, somebody that was a creative individual who was attempting to break out of the box of consensus reality. So it was a shaman, let's say. And this is just a thought experiment. I know I can get into trouble even for suggesting that Manson wasn't a bad guy, but that's kind of the point. We have to believe, and we have to, even if we doubt, we shouldn't even talk about it, because Manson is evil, and that's it. Hitler is evil, and that's that. Don't question these realities, because if you do question them, then you must be sympathetic. You must basically be advocating what these people supposedly, the crimes that they perpetrated. Another thing that comes to mind is this saying in the legal system that any prosecutor can convict a guilty man, but it takes a great prosecutor to convict an innocent man. And so if you take that to an even higher level with Masonic sorcery, that it's very easy to make us believe that Ted Bundy's a bad guy. But if they can find somebody who's basically innocent and manipulate the events around that person so that they're a charismatic leader who actually are attempting to do something creative, to break out of the box, but then they surround that person with operatives, and they subtly direct events and then towards this climax, and then of course they set up the main figure who actually wasn't a player on their team, although to some extent they would have been manipulating him too, as the pharmacos.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. See, a lot of people suggested that Manson was being used by the intelligence agencies in the same way that Lee Harvey Oswald was used. That Oswald was aware of that he was working as an agent. He was infiltrating like the Fair Play for Cuba committee and putting up this front as a communist. In the same manner, they might have seen Manson. They might have even got to him while he was in prison. Saw this charismatic, somewhat talented musician, had this energy about him, and he'd be somebody good to use to infiltrate everything that was going on, the counterculture and the anti-war movement, and basically use him as an agent provocateur to bring about social unrest, strategy attention, like Mae Brussels suggested. And Manson said a curious line, and I got this quote from John Judge. Manson said something to the effect, after he got busted on the tape, the LaBianca murders, he wanted to know who was, quote, peeing on his leash, which to John Judge meant that when you get leather wet, it expands, then when it dries, it will contract, and that's what they did to Manson. They peed on his leash. They let him out and let him do his thing for a couple of years, and when they had to set him up for the murders, they reeled him back in and used him as the scapegoat. And so perhaps like Oswald, Manson might have been aware that he was being used, but he didn't see the extent of what a grand design it was, and what his handlers were trying to bring about, which was perhaps the undoing of the whole 60s anti-war movement and psychedelic movement. John Judge also makes the point that right after the Manson family murders, it was a long time before you saw anybody with long hair or hippies on television. They became verboten, and they were painted as, if you're long hair, you're a crazy acid gobbling, knife wielding maniac.